owns the most land in New York City? It's not a bank, it's not a real estate corporation, and no, it's not Donald Trump. It's Columbia University. Columbia is the single largest private property owner in New York City. And on all of that land Columbia owns, it doesn't pay over $179 million in property taxes every single year. But I'm getting ahead of myself. How did a university come to own the most land in the city? That's a complicated question, and we're going to try to answer it. But this isn't just a story about Columbia, because really it's impossible to tell this story without telling you about New York. So, yes, this is about Columbia, but it's really a story about New York City, about its history, its struggle, its mission, and who is winning the battle over the soul of the city.
In 1754, Columbia College was founded as the all-male King's College. But let's think about what's happening in 1754. There's growing discontent among the British colonists, and the British government is getting a little uneasy. So how best to reestablish dominance? The answer is to establish an academic, political, and religious foothold in New York City.
King's College was run by a board of governors composed of Crown officials and Anglicans. The thing was, the college was funded by the New York Assembly. This meant that King's College was in every way a private religious institution funded by the public. That really didn't make people happy. New York City was a diverse population composed of Dutch, French, Quaker, Catholics, and Jews. But the only people who attended Columbia College were the sons of wealthy Anglican families. King's College, through its religious affiliation and high tuition cost, meant it was by very nature elitist and exclusionary.
But then something happened, specifically the American Revolution. While Princeton, Harvard, Yale, and Brown all supported the revolution, King's College didn't. The college was largely regarded as a bastion of Tory sentiment. As revolutionary fervor took hold of the city, a mob actually came to take the president, Miles Cooper. But they were stopped by none other than undergraduate and founding father Alexander Hamilton. But while Hamilton could stop the mob, he couldn't stop the revolution.
In 1776, the college was turned into a military hospital. And when the war ended in 1783, it wasn't so clear what would happen to a college that had been so closely aligned with the British and Anglican Church. In 1784, the New York legislature passed an act to alter the charter of King's College and create a new college, Columbia College. This new charter made it so that Columbia College was governed by city and state officials. Their mandate was not just to look after Columbia, but to, quote, erect a university in this state.
Yes, Columbia was a public institution. It was governed by and funded by the state. That didn't last long though. In 1787, a new charter was passed by the New York State Legislature. With this new charter, Columbia reverted back to being privately owned and governed by a board of trustees. This is the same charter that is in place to this day.
Whoa, so in 33 years, Columbia went from a pet project of the Church of England for the wealthy political elite, to a military hospital, to a public university ran by the state, to a completely private entity. How?
Well, Columbia can really just be thought of as a mirror to whatever political, social, and religious power exists in New York. So when the Church of England was a powerful player, Columbia was King's College in order for the university to show its loyalty to the church and to the king. But when New York State needed to show its loyalty to the new republic, King's College was named Columbia College, and it was founded as a state university. But why did the public university turn private?
That was part of a much larger discussion into what education was, and more importantly, who deserved to get an education. It's hard to imagine today, but it was actually George Washington's dream to establish a national university. This was to be a place where all citizens could come and foster a national identity. Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, and James Monroe all supported this vision, but the National University never came to be. Columbia's brief stint as a public institution serves as an important case study as to why.
First, colleges cost money, and with so many other legislative priorities in the wake of the new republic, higher education was simply not high enough on the list.
Second, not everyone wanted to go to school. Outside of the city, it was largely rural, and you didn't need a degree to be a farmer.
Third, and probably most importantly, gatekeeping. King's College served the same 36 or so wealthy families, funneling their sons into becoming clergymen, doctors, and lawyers. If suddenly the purpose of college was to educate and uplift everyone, well, these wealthy and elite families could no longer monopolize their status in society.
We flash forward to 1831, the Jacksonian era, It was a time marked by an aversion to the wealthy elites and opening up opportunities for the common man, or in this time period, just a bunch of white dudes. It was a time of political and economic reckoning for many, and it made Columbia University a main political target. And so New York University, or as it was known then, the University of the City of New York, was founded. It was an institution founded by clergymen and democratic theorists and merchants who sought to create an institution that was reflective of the wants and needs of the current age of the country. And what were these wants? In the 1820s, there were calls across the country for voting rights for unpropertiered men and for free education for the children of the working class. So to establish this, Albert Gallatin had three principles in which he wanted to found the university.
First, the university had to be non-denominational. Second, it had to admit students not based on their social class, but on their merit. This university was not just to educate the scholars of the time, those lawyers, doctors, and clergymen, but also to educate people who wanted to become mechanics, merchants, or farmers. Third, the university was to funnel students into the great metropolis of New York. Remember, we're in Andrew Jackson's America. He envisioned an agrarian society, looking to the plains of the West, not to the coastal elite or the big cities. To open a university that would serve the children of the working class men of the city in hopes they would one day return to that same metropolis and contribute to it was incredibly risky. It was not always a given that New York would be the same New York that it is today. Famously, Ford Madox Ford titled his 1927 book, "New York is not America." But now, if you go anywhere around the world and you ask a random person what city they think of when they think of the United States, they would say New York. The metropolis won in the end. It was a good bet to make.
However altruistic the founders of NYU were, it didn't really work out. Tuition at NYU was $80 a year, and for comparison, Columbia's was $90 and Harvard's was $176. The average skilled laborer in the city earned around $1 a day. Any sort of tuition was inherently exclusive. It is a barrier which bars working class people the most. So NYU ended up serving the same families as Columbia, the sons of upper class New Yorkers. Once again, we find ourselves with an education system that only educates the upper class. And someone decided to do something about it. In 1847, the president of the New York City Board of Education, Townsend Harris, founded the Free Academy. In his own words, the purpose of the Free Academy was to make the new college the property of the people. Let the children of the rich and the poor take their seats together and know of no distinction. Jeffersonian democratic principles should be a part of higher education. Most importantly, this college was to be tuition-free. This was radical. In fact, it is perhaps the longest-running radical social experiment in American history. Harris stated, "The experiment is to be tried whether the children of the people, the children of the whole people, can be educated, and whether an institution of the highest grade can be successfully controlled by the popular will, not by the privileged few." Immediately, the elite did not like this. Think pieces came out in the papers saying that a free college would be of lesser quality and would erode the elite character of obtaining a college degree. After all, at the time, Columbia and NYU both charged a lot in tuition and both enrolled a grand total of 245 students in a city with a population of 500,000. Columbia and NYU were an elite boys club, and the Free Academy threatened to disrupt it. And disrupt it did. City College, which the Free Academy renamed itself to in 1866, became a beacon of economic and social mobility for immigrants, especially for Jews. Between 1881 and 1924, 2.8 million Jewish immigrants came to the United States from Eastern Europe. By 1910, 70% of City College students had a Jewish surname. City College was working class and immigrant run to its core. Almost all of City College students came from lower income groups. 40% of fathers of City College students were unskilled laborers, on relief, unemployed, not living with family, or deceased. Only 17% of fathers of City College freshmen were born in the States. And at this point, City College had 8,000 students and had established its presence in its Gothic campus in Harlem. It also established itself as an institution which supplied New York its teachers, engineers, managers, accountants, and lawyers. Seeing how renowned City College was, the demand for higher education grew. New York City continued to make a substantial and sustained investment of tax dollars in its public higher education system in the decades prior to World War II, covering more than 90% of the municipal system's total operating budget. The city system now counted 4 tuition-free senior college campuses, expanding in Brooklyn, Queens, and the Bronx. CUNY was known as the poor man's Harvard, the Harvard for the proletariat, and the Harvard on the Hudson for how excellent the education was and the fact it educated working-class New Yorkers. So what the hell happened?
Reagan happened. Neo-Liberalism happened. Privatization happened. In 1974, the world entered a financial crisis, the worst since the Great Depression. In June 1975, the New York State Legislature surrendered the city's financial independence to an emergency financial control board, and this board was managed by the banking industry. Now, believe it or not, the banking industry was not too keen on preserving public education. They laid off mass numbers of municipal workers, cut CUNY's budget by tens of millions of dollars, and in 1976 mandated a state takeover of CUNY. Tuition was imposed on CUNY for the first time in 130 years. This coincidentally was a few years after the free admissions allowed for Black and brown New Yorkers to attend CUNY institutions. All construction was halted, and over 5,000 faculty and staff were laid off. And this beacon of social and economic mobility, this radical experiment in free public higher education, by and for the masses of the working class, it was destroyed. At one point, CUNY was 90% funded by the city. It was an experiment that the people really, truly bought into because it created results. It educated New Yorkers and uplifted them, but decades of austerity slowly eroded CUNY. In the 1980s, the Reagan Revolution cut taxes at the expenses of social goods. In the 1990s, Governor George Pataki and Mayor Rudy Giuliani continually cut CUNY's budget and raised tuition. In the 2000s, the 2008 financial crisis and the subsequent austerity measures imposed by the state suffocated CUNY even more. At the same time, while politicians and money interests gutted CUNY, 2 institutions were getting richer. A lot richer. In 1994, at the same time, Governor George Pataki was cutting CUNY's budget by $116 million. Columbia began a $650 million expansion into Morningside Heights. And in 2002, Columbia's president, Lee Bollinger, yes, that's his real name, announced a $6.3 billion expansion plan into West Harlem and Manhattanville. And downtown, NYU was making moves as well. NYU was actually based in the Bronx for almost a century. In 1894, NYU opened its University Heights campus in the Bronx, and 80 years later, in 1973, NYU sold this campus, citing urban decline, which was just code for there are too many Black and brown people in the neighborhood. Today, NYU's Washington Heights campus is Bronx Community College, which is part of the CUNY system. NYU spent the subsequent decades expanding into the village. The same year NYU sold its campus in the Bronx, NYU opened Bobst Library, much to the dismay of the community who claimed NYU was a public menace, an octopus gobbling up all the property around the square. If in 1973 people thought NYU was gobbling up property, they would not know what hit them today. Over the 1990s and 2000s, NYU continued to eat away at the village, and the most egregious expansion came in 2007 when NYU President John Sexton introduced the 2031 expansion plan, a 6 million square foot expansion at the cost of $6 billion. Why have Columbia and NYU expanded so rapidly? Well, it's really simple. It's profitable. Despite Columbia and NYU claiming nonprofit status, these schools both have a lot of money. In 2022, Columbia reported making $911 million. Former Columbia President Bollinger earned nearly $3.9 million in 2021, and former NYU President Andy Hamilton made $3.5 million. And as quote-unquote nonprofit institutions, real estate is really, really good investment for them. Due to their nonprofit status, they got to evade hundreds of millions of dollars in property taxes every single year. New York State is essentially incentivizing them to expand and gobble up property because it's so profitable and easy. Money rules these institutions. Like when CUNY was directed by the banking industry and subsequently laid off professors and started charging tuition, so too are NYU and Columbia governed by real estate giants and corporate interests. On the board of trustees at NYU and Columbia include executives from bank, real estate companies, and venture capital firms. These universities are not governed by professors, academics, or students because these universities' main goal is no longer to educate, it's to make a profit.
So, as NYU and Columbia have expanded their real estate empires, ballooned their multi-billion-dollar endowments, and given their administration million-dollar salaries, CUNY has been starved out. This has resulted in vast inequalities in the resources of these schools and has had detrimental effects on the students who attend. Let's take a closer look at what I mean. Tuition at NYU is $63,000 and tuition at Columbia is $71,000. The median family income of a student from NYU is $149,000. At Columbia, the median family income is $150,000. Compare that to CUNY, where the median family income of a student from City College is $40,000. Pell Grant recipients make up around 57% of CUNY's population. At NYU, that number is 24%, and at Columbia, that number is 21%. So, the people who attend CUNY are overwhelmingly working class, and the people who attend Columbia and NYU are overwhelmingly upper middle class or simply the upper class. And due to the chronic underfunding of CUNY and the massive wealth NYU and Columbia have hoarded, the resources given to these students are night and day. CUNY's endowment is $1.1 billion, NYU's is $5.9 billion, and Columbia's is a whopping $14.8 billion, which is the GDP of some small nations. The student-to-faculty ratio at these schools is indicative of just how stretched thin CUNY is compared to NYU and Columbia. The student-to-faculty ratio at Columbia is 6:1, so 6 students for every 1 professor. The student-to-faculty ratio at NYU is 8:1, and at CUNY, the student-to-faculty ratio is 27:1. At Columbia and NYU, sure, registering for classes sucks. Sometimes the class you really wanted is not offered. Sometimes you can't take it because the spot's filled up too quickly. But at CUNY, students are literally unable to graduate because the classes they need just aren't offered. And that's part of the reason why the 4-year graduation rate at these schools is so different. At Columbia, the 4-year grad rate is 84%. At NYU, the 4-year grad rate is 79%, and at CUNY, the 4-year grad rate is 27%. And this is not even to mention the state of disrepair CUNY is in.
Yo, what the hell?
Walk around any CUNY building and you'll see just how decades of austerity have affected the schools and the students who learn there. I said at the beginning that we were going to tell you a story about Columbia and the city, about its beginnings as an Anglican church project, to its brief stint as a public university, to its massive property and wealth accumulation in the 21st century, to the point where it is now the single largest private property owner in New York City. Columbia's story is a story of what New York City and what America wants to prioritize and what it values. When America decided to put profits above people and property values over education and the wealthy over the working class, we now have a multi-billion-dollar real estate corporation which just so happens to give out diplomas on the side. Before we end this video, I want to tell you one more story. I actually went to NYU, and I'll forever remember this. It was my freshman year. I had lived in New York at this point for about a week, and me and my roommate decided to go to visit the 9/11 memorial. I don't know why, maybe we thought that's what New Yorkers did. We were stopped by this man, and he asked us, "Hey, what are you guys doing in the city?" And I said, "Oh, we're NYU students, we just moved here." And I'll never forget the look on his face. He scoffed, rolled his eyes, and said, "NYU? That school is growing like a mold all over the city." I was very taken aback. I thought people in New York loved NYU. I thought it was such a progressive institution, that it was the campus without walls, that everyone loved NYU for all the good it brought to the community. But I was very quickly proven wrong. Everywhere I went, it seemed that people hated NYU. They hated Columbia. They hated what these institutions were doing to the city. Instead of giving into despair after watching this video, you can do something about it. As nonprofits, NYU and Columbia evade a lot in property taxes, over $300 million every single year. However, there's a piece of legislation called Repair being put up to the New York State Legislature this year. Repair, or Repeal Egregious Property Accumulation and Invest It Right, demands that NYU and Columbia pay their property taxes and invest that $300 million right into CUNY. You can write to your representative to demand that they support repair and higher education equity in New York. And this issue of higher education inequity and private universities amassing vast real estate portfolios isn't just an issue in New York. Harvard and Cambridge, Yale and New Haven, Stanford in the Bay Area, and USC in Los Angeles are all part of the problem, but you can be part of the solution. CUNY used to be free. It was a free college where anyone, no matter what their background was, could go and get not just an education, but an amazing education. It was a radical social experiment in American history. It was an experiment testing a theory on how the American dream could become reality. That theory worked for a really long time. It is our duty then to continue testing it.